Hey there everyone, this is MrLuBuFu, and well, this is my new series, Limited Lessons. It's my first attempt at a formally scheduled with scripted videos specifically designed for those of you that want to improve your limited, i.e. draft and sealed skills. Today we're going to talk about one of the commonly used abbreviation when it comes to card evaluation and beginning understanding of draft formats, BREAD. Now, I've heard two major descriptions of what the acronym BREAD stands for. It's either bombs removal, efficient spells, aggro and duds, or bombs removal, evasion, attackers and defenders. So we're going to break down what each of these mean, referencing many of the drafting formats that I'm most comfortable with and with some key examples through Magic's history. So beginning with B, or bombs, they're mostly describing the cards that if you cast them and they resolve, they're very likely to win the game by itself. Every draft format has those cards where they're not necessarily rares, but they're cards that are just incredibly powerful. Theros has quite a few that reward particular strategies. Like, you can begin with saying, oh, Prognostic Sphinx or Elspeth Sun's Champion are just complete bombs, and it's completely true. But in other archetypes, there are certain cards that can be, incredibly powerful. Wingsteed Rider is insane if you're drafting the dedicated heroic deck. Nessun Asp also is incredibly difficult for most decks to deal with. While they're not, of course, like, I'm not trying to compare Nessun Asp to Elspeth, that's ridiculous. But in certain archetypes, there are certain cards that can just be as balmy and should be taken incredibly highly in the draft. B is basically the first one you want to take. Next we have R, which stands for removal. Now, removal is just a general term that is used to describe cards that deal with opposing creatures and spells. But it's very hard for a lot of people to evaluate correctly. I mean, it's simple in concept. Oh, look, this card kills creatures, but it depends a lot on the format. For example, if we take the card Smelt, this card was almost completely unplayable in M14. However, in Scars of Mirrodin Limited, Shatter, a card that does the same effect but costs 1 more mana, was considered one of the premier commons. For the same reason, Oxida Scrap Melter was one of the premier uncommons. It's for that same reason that certain cards like Lash of the Whip and Raging Perforos and Theros are just not high quality, or like are not taken anywhere near as high as cards like Sip of Hemlock or even Lightning Strike. Paying the extra mana for damage in a format where 4/5s exist is just not worth it. It's inefficient, even though it still qualifies as quote-unquote removal. Next we are up to evasion, or efficient spells, and this is another category where knowing the format is incredibly critical. In Mirrodin block drafts, original Mirrodin, you could find solid efficient spells in the form of equipment. Bone Splitter, Skull Clamp being some of the better ones. Of course, Skull Clamp's a little bit broken, but even Bone Splitter was very powerful in that format. Evasion's also incredibly critical for other reasons. I mean, take for example in Tempest block draft. Any aggressively costed flying or shadow creature would be way more valuable because in the format there were just a lot of ground stalls and the format was very, very slow. And if you're talking about, like, if we go back to like efficient spells, um, the Ordeal cycle in Theros is also highly contested. Next we have aggro aggressive creatures for A. In a draft sealed event, typically filling out a curve can change the entire course of the game. Having aggressively costed 2 to 3 mana creatures can be necessary just to stay alive, even if you're a slower deck. In your deck you want maybe 13 to 17 creatures, and you want a pretty consistent curve. Like, you're playing all 5 and 6 mana creatures, you can be put so far behind on tempo if they just go 2-drop into 3-drop that you're in trouble. Being able to curve out, even if you're playing 2 mana 2/2s, 3 mana 3/3s, even 4 mana 3/3s sometimes are necessary depending on the drafting format. And just being able to fill your curve with like aggressively costed creatures. And lastly we have D, which is like defenders or duds. Now, when we're talking about defenders, it is important to consider your deck. Sometimes, in Theros, your deck just really needs a Yoke Dock to stay alive in the early portions of the game. So it's not like, oh, they're the absolute worst, but it's important to keep that in mind. And then if you're talking about duds there, well, the leftovers. Every set has them, the cards you don't want to play. Whether you're talking about like Artificer's Hex at M14 or Defend the Hearth in Theros. Oftentimes you end up with 2 to 3 of these cards in a draft just because you're forced to take them with your final few picks. You really don't want to be playing any of these unless you have like a dedicated strategy around them. Now, when it comes to bread, there's something that is incredibly critical, and this is perhaps the most important part of the video to take into mind. From my personal experience talking with people and streaming and listening, people value bread perhaps a little bit too highly. It's not like the answer, it's not the Bible for how to draft. It's an outline, it's a skeleton that helps guide you towards an okay draft. But sometimes you have to be able to deviate from it. And sometimes these deviations are completely correct. It's also incredibly important to properly judge where cards fit in bread. As I said before, just because a card can be counted as removal doesn't necessarily mean it should be taken over another card that better fits the deck. That's basically it for this first episode. Next week we'll be talking about actually taking the correct pick for your deck and how bread can be interacted or switched a little bit so that way you have a solid, consistent deck, which of course can lead to a higher chance of winning. I hope you guys enjoyed this. This is going to be, as I said, the first one in a new series. I'm going to do a lot of editing, so this should be fun. If you guys enjoyed the series, just leave comments down below. I'm very interactive with you guys. And if you guys have any ideas for the future episodes, I'm more than happy to include them. Thank you guys all for watching, and rate, comment, subscribe, like, and yeah, that's it. Thank you.